Today, I think on Daf Nun Chet, if I'm correct, right? 58. And I don't actually remember what he said, but I'm assuming you got to the two dots at the bottom of Nun Zayin Amud Bet, which is where we're going to start. And this is a very complex Gemara, but we will be able to accomplish it because we have the brightest minds here. But it's a reminder that nothing is ever really straightforward in Bava Kamma, just in case you didn't know that already. But the Mishnah that we are dealing with in this parak is called Hakones. It's a very famous parak that many people learn in yeshiva. I think I learned this in some young grade, and hopefully again at an older grade. And the question was, it's a combination of watching, right? What responsibility do you have to watch your animal, and then what responsibility do you have for damaging that your animal does? Okay. And so that was how our mission started about, and we actually went on a little bit of a tangent yesterday to introduce a lot of concepts from Bava Motzaei about what level of watching you have to have, a shomer sachar and a shomer chinam, and et cetera, et cetera. Today we get back to our Mishnah, because our Mishnah said the last two cases in our Mishnah were if you have an animal. I'm going to talk about a cow, but obviously it's true about any animal that you have to watch. The Mishnah said if it's nafla legina, if it falls into someone else's garden, now we're going to see that assuming animals don't usually fall into the garden, right? There's a fence around the garden. So your animal was on a different road and it fell off a hill or rolled down a highway, a side of Reshut Harabim, into a garden, which is considered to be an unusual act. It's not common for animals to enter gardens through the air, okay? So your animal entered this garden in an unusual way. The Mishnah said if it was nehenate, your animal then benefited from eating or from something in the garden, you pay what it benefited, mashin nehenate. But now, the reason that's important is the next words of the Mishnah are, yarda kedarka, if the animal went into the garden normally, meaning through the front door, and it caused damage, then you are mishalem masha hizika. You pay the damage. What's the difference between benefit and damage? So the simple, obvious case, there's many cases of this, but the simple one is that let's say your animal went in and ate very valuable truffles. It's the case I'm going to use, right? So a handful of truffles, which on the market would cost you, and truffles cost like $1,000 an ounce or something, right? So it ate 5 pounds of truffles, which is $10,000 or whatever, $50,000 worth of value. But of course, for your animal, which does not definitely appreciate truffles more than any other grain, it's like it ate one meal. So you saved, 50 cents. So mashin nehenate would be the benefit the animal got, which is really the benefit you get from not having to feed your animal. But mashin nizak, which you damaged, is of course the cost to the owner. So which is going to be substantially higher in most cases, in all cases. So if it fell into there by mistake, you only pay what you benefited. If it fell because you weren't watching it, you walked in, then you pay the damage. The Mishnah then continued to discuss how do you assess that damage, right? Is the damage assessed? And we said it's not in fact assessed based on, let's say the animal went into the garden and ate 4 rows of tomatoes. You don't say, eats their field, and we always assess the value and the cost based on it. You don't base on what it ate.
Ellie, you're breaking up a little bit.
Sorry?
You're breaking up a little bit.
Oh, that's not good. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, who is the Zoom host?
That's Charlie.
Oh.
Hey, that's me. I'm not a Zoom host. That's Apostle. And I was having trouble hearing too.
Oh, so I'm sorry about that. Well, tell me which part, but hopefully full house tonight. But I'm going to repeat this again. Just tell me if it's not clear, if I'm breaking
Tell
up.
Navi to put her phone down.
Okay, Rosa.
Not Rosa, Navi.
But the way you evaluate is you look at a field and basically you say, now I'm going to very simplify this for practical reasons. Don't go take this in practice. But you basically look at a field and say, look, if I went to someone else and said, I want to buy your field full of tomatoes, how much would it cost, right? $10,000. Now I say, wait a second, I want to sell you this field full of tomatoes, but there's 2 rows of tomatoes that are missing. What's the difference in cost? So that is the amount of damage that we consider to have been done, which is generally thought to be much less than paying for tomatoes, right? Because obviously, if you're buying a apple orchard and there's 10 trees that are empty, the cost of those 10 trees is much less than 10 trees, 10 apples worth of trees. So we're going to discuss that today in the Gemara, how we assess all this, but that's based on a pasuk. So now that we have that whole introduction, let's start at the 2 dots on the bottom of Nun Zayin Amud Bet. Your animal falls. So this is an onus. It falls by mistake into someone else's garden and eats something there. Mishalemet mashenaneit. You have to enjoy garden. Amar Rav says, Rav, no, it's not actually eating. For the point, it's binech b'ta. It's when your animal fell into the garden, and by falling into the garden,
Ellie, maybe turn off your video. Keeps stalling.
You're frozen, Ellie.
So, okay. Can you guys hear me? Is this good?
No,
connection?
not working.
Now we can hear you.
Now you can. Okay, I don't know what's going on. Sorry. I hope it doesn't continue. But if not, if it does, I can switch from my Wi-Fi to my phone. But as the Gemara, it's benich bita. Rav says when the animal cushioned its fall by falling into the garden. What does that imply? The benefit of cushioning its fall. But if it actually ate food in the garden, does that mean you don't pay what happened because you fell into the garden from eating? You only pay the benefit of, cushioning its fall? Lema Rav l'tamei. Could this possibly be consistent with something Rav said, which really seems to have nothing to do with it? But we'll see a very tenuous connection. Damar Rav, remember that we had a case last week, I think it was, 2 weeks ago now, where an animal walked into someone put their peyrot in someone else's garden. Right? So I, without asking permission, let's call me the bad guy, I took my peyrot and put them into your yard because I didn't have any space in my yard. Then, of course, your animal walked up to the peyrot, smelled them, said, these smell really good, and ate them all. So I can't come to you and say, well, you ate my peyrot because you put them in my yard, right? But the Gemara said earlier, but if, let's say, my animal walked up to those peyrot, I have a lot of my animals. The person put their peyrot into someone else. Reuven put his peyrot into Shimon's yard. Shimon's animal then walked up to those peyrot and ate them and slipped on those peyrot, tripped on them and broke its hips. So then I can say to Reuven, why'd you put your peyrot in my yard? They ended up hurting my shar. But if Shimon's animal ate the peyrot and got diarrhea because they were, moldy, and then had a problem, Shimon can't come to Reuven and say, why'd you put your peyrot in my yard for my animal to eat them and cause it damage? Reuven can say to Shimon, why'd your animal eat the peyrot? So it's not my fault. So let's read that inside. Damarav, you shouldn't be in the animals. Shouldn't be in the peyrot, right? Reuven doesn't have to pay because he can say to Shimon, it's not my fault. So you say the same thing here, that the animal falls into the garden, Reuven's animal, and he goes to Shimon and says, well, my animal shouldn't have eaten, so I don't have to pay for my animal eating. Amri said, no, it can't be the case because
You could intentionally poison someone else's animal?
You didn't intentionally. No, it was a mistake. But the animal got damaged ultimately. Shimon's animal got damaged because it ate the peyrot that should not have been there, right? So do you say that Reuven is responsible? But the Gemara said, Rav said earlier that Reuven is not responsible because Reuven can say to Shimon, your animal should not have eaten the peyrot. So it seems to be saying the same kind of thing here. Sorry? I keep losing me? You guys hear me?
We hear you.
Oh.
Now Charlie's having trouble.
Oh, Charlie. Okay, sorry. So it could very well be that same thing here. Reuven's shar fell off the highway into Shimon's garden. Reuven and then ate the fruit. Maybe Reuven can say to Shimon, well, my animal, I'm sorry, I didn't want my animal to eat, so it's not my fault. And that's obviously not an equivalent case, right? Hachi hashta. Emer damar Rav hatam. Rav says over there by the case where one person, Reuven's fruits are in Shimon's garden, right? Where it caused damage. It caused damage because it ate and got a stomach ache. The Matzi Amrle Mari Deperi, because the owner of the fruit, Reuven, can say, Lo Mishalem. Now I'm not paying you for the damage that my fruit ultimately caused your cow, because Haya Lo Shelo Techal Lazuke. You should not have eaten. But to say that when my animal ate someone else's fruit, Lazuke hi achrini, my animal fell into your garden and ate your fruit, can I say that I don't have to pay because my animal shouldn't have eaten, but my animal did eat your fruit, and so therefore I should have to pay you? Ella says, obviously it's not correct. It's not a similar analogy, and lomi boy Kamma. In fact, what Rav was saying is not that you're putter for eating, you only have to pay for the benefit of the cushioning of the fall that the fruit caused. He's saying for sure you have to pay what you ate. Lomi by achla, for sure if the animal falls into the other garden and eats fruit, I gotta pay you what the animal ate. Benefited, sorry. I gotta pay the benefit I got from my animal eating in your garden. But if it just didn't actually eat, it just fell and squashed your squashes by falling on them, maybe that's equivalent to a case that we had actually in Gittin a couple of times of something called mavriach ari, which means chasing away a lion, right? We had cases before where if a person, let's say, let's just pick the lion case, that's the obvious case. I see a lion coming to your yard and I run out and I chase away the lion and don't let it eat your cows, right? So then I go to the owner and be like, I saved your animals, pay me up. The halacha is that you don't have to pay because we assume, now it's not clear why, Tosfos here, as you can see, discusses for a very long time exactly why, but we assume either a person is happy they did a mitzvah or there's no expectation that you collect payment for saving somebody else's thing. So here too, maybe it's the exact same thing. Your fruit cushioned my animal's fall. So my animal fell into your garden, and thank you very much for preventing my animal from getting hurt. My animal didn't benefit because it didn't eat anything. Maybe I actually don't have to pay you. You just did me a favor. So maybe you don't have to pay.
But what about the damage that the animal may have caused while falling?
So that's the Gemara's answer, right? Nate, you might have thought it's mavriach harim nechsei chavero, and that's like chasing away a lion. And mashen Nate nami lo mishalem. I don't even know what I benefited, which is the cushion the fall. Kamash milan. This is maybe in fact you don't have to pay. And the answer is what you just said. The mavriach, two answers. First of all, mavriach harim nechsei chavero midat tohu, right? When I chase away a lion, I chose to chase away the lion. Here, my animal fell into your garden. You did not say, oh, your animal's on its way down. Why don't you fall in my garden, right? I'll cushion the fall. It's not like there's the helicopter, what's called the parachute broke. I'm like, directed to my garden. So I didn't allow you to do it. You did it, and now you're coming to me after the fact. And furthermore, what you just said, which is, inami mavriach ari minechsei chavero letle pseida. There's no loss involved in that case, right? I went out and I chased away the lion. I put myself at risk, but I didn't ruin any of my fruits. Here, the cow fell on the fruit and ruined it. And therefore you certainly have to pay, not just for the damage that the animal ate, which is what I benefited because I don't have to feed my animal. So the owner, benefited. But furthermore, you have to pay damage that benefited my animal indirectly or indirectly from eating, but from cushioning its fall and for making it a more pleasant experience for my animal. Okay.
But you would pay the cost of animal feed, not the cost of the actual food.
Absolutely right. So
For
because
what he ate.
Started off by happening,
and then for what he damaged, you would pay the actual cost of the items.
No, incorrect. For both, you only pay the benefit, the nanate. Because since it started off by an onus, meaning the animal fell into your garden in a freak accident, it fell off the side of a highway. So therefore, I'm actually not chayav in general for the damage it caused. I only have to pay for the benefit I got. If my animal walked into your garden, right, through the front door, like a normal way, and I wasn't watching it, then I got to pay the damage it caused. So you don't pay damage. Remember, damage of animal eating is called shame, right? Now. You don't pay shame unless it walks in.
That'll help you.
But since it came in by an accident, you don't have to pay the damage, but you do have to pay the benefit that you got, which is of course much less than the damage in almost every case.
Did
Now,
Yan
ask the
eat the
Gemara.
food?
Or just
Sorry?
fall on the food? Did the animal eat the food or just destroy the food?
So what Rob said is both, right? I mean, you have to, again, it doesn't matter so much about whether it ate the food or destroyed the food. If it fell on it and destroyed the food, then you pay the benefit that you get for cushioning its fall, which could be a lot, I guess. If it also ate the food, you have to pay the extra.
How do you calculate that benefit? Like what you would pay the difference between a lame animal and a healthy animal?
I suspect that, yeah, you would say, even if you would say to someone, if your animal was falling 20 feet, right, how much benefit is it to you to have it cushioned its fall by this kind of method? Which should be a lot, presumably, again, because it won't get hurt. Now, again, I don't know that tomatoes are the best way to cushion a fall, right? So there's a relative value there that it might depend on. Ask the Gemara, though, the question, which I think we're getting to, which is Heicha Nafla. So explain to me how the animal fell, meaning how big of an accident was it, right? Did someone or something come pick up the animal in its teeth and drop it there, right? That would obviously be a tremendous onus and suitable for a movie. Says Rav Kahana, no, what happened was he slipped on his urine on a wet patch in the ground. So he's walking down the street like a very calm shore, and there's a field, 6 feet below the embankment, and he slips on urine, which is very common, and falls into the garden. Now, that's considered an onus because we've all seen animals all the time. I don't know that many animals, but the animals don't usually fall down on their own urine. They urinate all the time, and that's not a common thing. So I guess it could happen, but it's certainly not something you have to plan for. So that's considered to be an accident, right? Rava
Is the Gemara saying it is the animal's own urine?
That's what the Gemara is saying, but obviously, again, the point is doesn't have to be its own urine. It's just saying something that was there, that was somewhat predictable, but
why would the Gemara say that then?
You mean as opposed to what, someone else's urine?
Just like it could just say wet spot, or it could just say
I don't. I'm not sure, but I guess that's an example of wet spot. They didn't have oil stains back in those days, I guess. Rava says shedachva chaverta. No. The case is where you have 3 cows walking down the road, and there's a narrow spot in the Reshut Rabim, and one of the cows pushes its friend because it's trying to get ahead of it and knocks it over the embankment. So that is a little bit more predictable. It says Marmanda Amar shedachva chaverta. If you say that you're putter even when another cow pushes it, for sure you're putter if it has this freak accident and slips on its urine. But in the other way, you wouldn't necessarily say it. The one who says you're putter when your animal fell because it slipped on urine, that opinion might be Rav Kahana, but if another animal pushes it over, pasha, that might be considered to be negligence. Of course, it's not. This is where the Rishonim talk about this question of negligence. It's obviously not common, right? Animals walk down the road all the time and they are not jostling each other too much to knock over the edge, but it's predictable. And you would then have to pay more. You'd have to pay all the damage, not just the benefit, but the damage, which of course is much higher. Because we would say to the owner of the cow, you should have had your cows go one at a time. You know it's a tight spot. You know that there's a field right over the embankment. So you know that there's susceptibility to cause damage. You should have taken unusual precautions. Now, of course, again, it's not common. Cows usually figure it out on their own, right? Most of the time, you don't have to walk one at a time, like over the bridge. But you should say, if you could have anticipated that there's a risk of this and that there could cause damage if your cow falls into the field, and therefore you are considered to be negligent, and therefore you are chayav for all damages, not just the benefit that you got. So you see that this is not, when we say negligent, we say, onus, it doesn't mean any onus. It means a totally unpredictable onus. Amar Rav Kahana. Now says Rav Kahana, another important point. Lo shanu, when we say that you are patur for the damage your cow does, you only have to pay the enjoyment it got. That's only b'oto aruga. That's only for the row that it fell into, right? Your cow fell into one row in the cabbage patch and ate all the cabbages. If your cow got up and walked around the garden and ate the rest of the garden, that's considered to be shame. You got to pay everything. And again, this is assuming you know that your animal fell there, right? We have the case in the Mishnah. If you don't know about it, then we can't necessarily be mechayiv you. But let's say you saw it happen, your animal got up, you didn't get it out of the garden in time, and it ate other rows in the garden, you got to pay the full damage. And Rabbi Yochanan says it's not true. It's not true. If your animal fell into that garden, it's not clear why this would be, fell in by accident, then once it's in the garden, until it's left, you're putter on anything that happened in that garden, except for the benefit your animal got, but you're putter from any damage. Say until the animal actually leaves the garden, and then if it goes back in, then that's your negligence. V'tachzar lidat, with your knowledge, with your awareness. I'm Rav Papa, let me just clarify Rav Yochanan. It's not once your animal left and you have to know it went back in before you're chayav. Ella kivan shiatzaladat. Once you know, oh, my cow fell into Joe's garden and it ate a little bit and now I got it out. But then you have to recognize that your cow is going to want to go back there, because once you get a taste of those sweet, what do I call them before? Truffles, you're going back, right? So therefore, even if it went back and you didn't know it went back, you're chayav, because you have to recognize that you need a higher level of shmirah. My time, because they can say to the owner, even the yalfa, once that animal went in there and had a taste of it, we know that the next chance you give your cow is running back to that garden, right? Because once it gets a smell, and obviously they have a very good sense of smell and taste, you got to then watch it on a higher level. So you have to be very careful that it doesn't go back in there, and if it does, you're chayav for all damages. So
I thought you said you'd be chayav anyway if he walked through the front gate.
So yes, the answer is yes, you'd be chayav anyways walk through the front gate. The real question is what level of expectation you have to have that it can get into that garden. So what we're saying here is that you have a higher level of shmirah that you need to do once your animal has tasted the food. So that a normal animal, you could say, and again, this is, the Gemara earlier talked about this a little bit, that animals don't break down gates usually, right? Even though there's delicious food on the other side, it's not normal for a shar, even though it could, ram a gate and break it down, it's not normal to be done. But what we're saying here is that once your animal got a taste for it, that is considered to be more normal. Again, I'm not quantifying how secure the gate is, right? If it's 5 locks or 2 locks, but there's a higher level of shmirah once your animal got a taste of something.
So you might be responsible if it broke down the gate. Correct. After once being in there, as opposed to if it just broke down the gate stam, you would not be liable.
Correct, exactly.
And are you liable for the benefit even if it's more than the cost of the actual items, or you'd pay the lesser amount?
So it's a good question. I think you
like
would
if it ate grass, and grass is less expensive than barley.
Yeah. It's a good question. I think you would only, I don't know the answer. I think you'd probably just be you would be chayav for what it benefited in every case, but I'm not sure. I don't recall anyone considering the possibility that there would be a disconnect between in that direction. It's a good question. Let me see if I could find anyone.
I mean, if it was like spoiled food, or
yeah,
lots of cases where it would.
I guess you could always sell it for animal feed, right? So then, anyways, continue the Mishnah. If the animal goes in Kedarka, so it walked in through the front gate, or there was no gate, Yarda Kedarka, the Hizika, and it causes damage, then Mishalemet Mashizika, you have to pay not what it benefited, but you have to pay the cost of the damage. Now, as we're going to clarify in a minute, it's not actually the cost of the damage. If it ate 50 tomatoes, I don't have to pay 50 tomatoes. I have to pay the value of a field that has 2,000 tomatoes, or the value of a field that has 1,950 tomatoes, okay? Which is going to be less usually than buying 50 tomatoes. So and don't take those numbers literally. We're going to discuss what it all means in a second. Now, by Rabbi Yirmiyah, ask Rabbi Yirmiyah, I got an interesting question, which we've actually dealt with many times already. So the Gemara assumes you know what we're talking about. Let's say your animal, Yarda Kedarka, walked into someone else's field and it did not start eating the tomatoes. You know what it did? It sat down and had a baby. Hizika b'meileda. It sat down and delivered a baby, which certainly large animals delivering babies cause a tremendous amount of damage to the surrounding ground and fruits in that area, right? So these tomatoes are no longer edible, not because the cow ate them or even squashed them, but because the water and the juice, the meileda, which means the water of birth, fell and ruined them. So Mao, do you have to pay for that kind of damage, right? So it says in right now, first of all, aliba demanda amar, we have obviously an opinion we've quoted many times, that tchilato b'pshia, if the action starts happening through your own negligence, and it's sofo ba'ones, but ultimately what happens is a accident, right? In one case we had, your animal goes up to the roof, which is a pshia. You should not have cows on the roof. But then a huge wind comes and knocks it off. So that was unavoidable, right? So there, according to the mandama, it says you're chayav for that. So this is the same case, right? Because your animal went in there b'pshia, it shouldn't have gone into the garden. What happened might have been unavoidable because it gave birth. I couldn't have predicted that. So then lo tibaylecha. Then there's no question that you're chayiv. Ki tibaylecha, when we're asking this question, is aliba demanda amar, according to the opinion that tchilato b'pshia v'sofo ba'ones patur, that usually if an animal goes up to the roof b'pshia and then gets knocked off in a total freak accident, you're patur for the damage caused. So what about this? Is this considered to be an onus? An animal giving birth, which is certainly an uncommon thing, is that considered to be out of my hands? Mahu, my. Mi amrina, do you say, look, that's the case. Kivan de tchilato b'pshia. My animal walked into your garden b'pshia. I was negligent. I should have watched it, and I didn't. But it didn't cause damage by walking in or eating. It caused damage by onus. So foba ones, therefore I'm patur. Right? I couldn't have known that it was going to give birth and do that. It's a very unusual thing. Oh, Dilmar, do you say that's not so unusual? Hacha, hula b'pshiahi. Because kivan de kachazi de krevela the melad, right? It's not like your animal became pregnant in the garden. Your animal was pregnant. If you own a cow, you better know when your animal is pregnant and getting close. You maybe can't predict the minute of delivery, but you certainly should have some sense that it's close. That's the Gemara's word. Krevela the melad. It's close to giving birth, and therefore so you got to watch it more carefully because you should recognize, oh, my animal is super well trained. It's not going to eat someone else's food, but it might give birth. So you got to watch it. Ulistamure begava. You got to lock it in front of it. So Teiko, we don't actually know how to view that level of pshia and onus in terms of childbirth. Very interesting question, and that question stumped the Gemara. Now, continues the Gemara, the final, it's not the final, we have a whole Amud here, of our Mishnah saying that, again, if my animal walks into your garden, eats 2 rows of tomatoes. So I'm going to give you this example. We're going to stick with it. I'm going to probably switch it up a little bit, but we're going to try. It eats, 2 rows of tomatoes. There's 50 tomatoes in a row. My animal eats 100 tomatoes, which I guess is a reasonable amount. Okay. Tosfos deals here with some of these unreasonable amounts, but the animal chows down on 100 tomatoes from your bush. You don't pay 100 tomatoes worth. Now we're going to see tomorrow that if the tomatoes are ripe and they're ready to be sold, there might be an exception. But let's say the tomatoes are not ripe, which is usually the case, right? So tomatoes have a certain value. Most people are not going to buy these tomatoes. They're still green, right? Now, over time, they might go up in value if they stayed on the vine. In this case, they're not going to stay on the vine because they're eaten, right? But also other things could happen. So how do you evaluate the value of those tomatoes? So says the Mishnah, you look at a beit sa'ah. You look at a field that's the size of a sa'ah, which we'll call an acre. And say you had a field of an acre of tomatoes, so 50 rows of tomatoes, and you say, how much is a field if I went to the market and said, I'm willing to sell my field full of tomatoes in mid-September, I don't know whenever tomatoes grow, mid-June, and there's 50 rows of tomatoes, right? My field might be worth $1,000, $10,000. And if I went and said, oh, it's only at 48 rows of tomatoes, what would be the difference in value? So you evaluate it within the perspective of a whole field, not from the individual rows. Ask the Gemara, how do you know that? Minani mili. Why in the world would you assume you don't just pay for what you damaged? So Amar of Matna, the Amar Krab, because the pasuk says, and we've again said this before, ubi'er b'sidei acher. Your animal goes out, it's the pasuk, and it eats. Bi'er means it eats in a different field. You pay. The pasuk continues. Blah blah blah. Meitav sadeo, meitav karmo yishalim. You got to pay back the best. Milamed, that teaches you, sheshamin agav sadeh acher, that you always assess the value not of what you ate, but of what you ate in the context of another field. Just remember 1 second. Before we analyze that, we use the pasuk bi'er b'stei acher to tell you something very important, which is that an animal is only chayav for shein if it eats in someone else's field, not in public, right? It tells you that if an animal eats in a public, you're not chayav. Only if an animal eats in someone else's field. So we have to say stay acher, not to tell you there's another field for value, but to tell you there's another field for requirement of damage. No, that's not necessary. Because you could have said b'stei chavero, and the pasuk often uses the word chavero when it talks about someone else's shor chavero, seo. Inami, you could have said stay acher. Why b'stei acher? My b'stei acher sheshamin agav stay acher. That in fact you have to rely on another field to assess the value. So maybe that's all it tells you. How do you know from this pasuk that an animal that eats in Reshut Rabim is patur? No, in King Dichter Achmana Gabi Tashlumin. It could have referred it when it says you pay. The next words, like I said, the end of the pasuk are Meitav Sadeu, Meitav Karmo Yishalem. It could have tacked on the words there. How do you pay? Biste Acher, in the value of another field. Why did it say it in causing the damage? It said it went out and ate in another field. When it's talking about eating, Shmamina Tarti. So therefore, you learn two things from the pasuk. One is that an animal that goes and eats is only chayiv if it eats in someone else's property. And second of all, the way you figure out how much to pay back is through someone else's, not someone else's, but some other property. Meaning, you don't assess the value of what it ate, you assess the value of what it ate within the context of a field. Ask the Gemara now, so how in fact do you do this? Tosfos really thinks that these two words prove everything I'm about to tell you from Rashi wrong, but I'm going to still tell you Rashi. So how do you in fact do that calculation? Let me just go back to the Mishnah 3 pages ago on Daf Nun Hey Amabed in the Mishnah. I'm going to read the words. You can turn back if you want. The Mishnah said, Shamin Beit Sa'ah Be'oto Sada. You evaluate one Beit Sa'ah. Beit Sa'ah, like I said, is somewhere like an acre. I think Charlie always has the measurements, but some size in a field. Kamma hayta yafa, the kamma hi yafa. How much was it worth? And how much is it worth now? Okay, so meaning a field with 50 rows of tomatoes versus a field of 48 rows of tomatoes, in my example. Says Rashi, that's evaluation number one. But the truth is that you have to make two evaluations. And the reason you have to make, according to Rashi, Tosfos is ridiculous because no one in the world mentions two evaluations. But says Rashi, it's not really fair to do it that way because you know what? An acre of land is a very small amount of land, right? Maybe it's less than an acre. I don't know how big an acre is, but it's not that big, right? And really, in general, people don't buy an acre of land. If you're farming, you got to buy much more than a Beit Sa'ah, right? You've got to buy many Beit Sa'ah. The only time people buy a Beit Sa'ah is if they're very poor, because poor people can't afford to buy what they need. So they buy, one, instead of going to Costco and getting a lot, you go to the bodega and buy one. And of course, as Rashi points out, poor people always lose, right? Because it costs a lot more money to buy a small amount. And therefore, if you're going to evaluate a field that's 1 acre size, it's going to be a high value. To go out and buy 1 acre might cost $1,000. If I bought 50 acres, it might only cost, I don't know, 30 times that, $30,000, let's say. But therefore, by looking at one at a time, you're overvaluing the field and making the person pay more damage. And therefore, the Gemara says, this is again Rashi's pshat, Amar Yossi bar Chanina, Sa'ah b'shishim sa'in. In fact, you should look at a field of 60 sa'ah, 60 Beit Sa'ah, so 60 acres, which is a big field, but that's the size that you should look at. So look at a 60-acre field, and then say, with a 60-acre field costs, say, $30,000, so what's that, $500 an acre. Each acre is $500. Within 1 acre, if you eat 2 rows out of 48, how much does that take off the value? Takes off, say, 5% of the value, 2% of the value. So 2% of whatever that was. So that's how much you end up paying. So that's how Reb Yossi Rebbe Chanina says. Reb Yanai says, well, really 60 sa'ah is too big of a field. You should have a 30 sa'ah field. Tarkav b'shishim tarkavim. A 30 sa'ah field. So tarkav, sorry, is trevikav, means 3. 3 kav is half of a sa'ah. A Beit Sa'ah is 6 kav. A sa'ah is 6 kav. Tarkav is half of that. So basically he's saying half the size. And Rashi goes through here that this is really the average normal kind of size that a person would have for a field. Okay. So but again, it's the same ratio. It's 1 in 60. It's just that you start off with the field that's 30 sa'ah. You look at how much is worth each half a sa'ah, which is a tarkav, and then how much damage did you cause within that space. Chizkiah says, no, forget about these fields. Kelach b'shishim klachim. You look at one kelach, one stalk in 60 stalks, meaning how much would this be worth if there was 60? Okay, Charlie's got our area here. Kelach b'shishim klachim. So it's 1/60. Meitvin. Ask the Gemara, what about the following Breita? Let's look inside the Breita. It's a confusing Breita, so let's read inside. Achla kav o kabayim. Let's say your animal walks into someone else's field and eats 1 kav or 2 kabim, which is a very small amount. Okay, it's not that much. Now, again, it's a little confusing because I'll add some confusion. Why not? Just to help. Because I just explained the Beit Sa'ah, as Charlie explained in the comments, if anyone has read them while I'm talking, that a Beit Sa'ah is the area in which you plant a Sa'ah of grain, right? So you take a Sa'ah of grain and you plant it, that area, which is 2,000 by 2,000 amot, is considered to be a Beit Sa'ah. The problem with that explanation is that the other Tosfos says that's a tremendous amount of size, right, to talk about these things. So the other meaning of a sa'ah is just a measurement of sa'ah, right? Not the seeds that plant this of sa'ah, but actually tomatoes that are sa'ah, which might be 6 tomatoes or 12 tomatoes, right? So that would be a much, much smaller size. So are you talking about the seeds or are you talking about the actual weight of the food? Anyway, says the Braita, let's say your animal eats a kav or kabayim. Ein omrim, we don't say to that person, tashlum de mayhem, pay back a kav or 2 kabim. Ella ro'ino to ki'ilu hi arugat kitana. You imagine that there's a row of these vegetables or fruit, whatever it is, umisharinota, and you evaluate how much it's worth. Now that implies that you just evaluate how much is a row of tomatoes.
Yeah.
My love, if ne'atzma, no, but no, we left out the main point. The main point is that you evaluate this row among 60 other rows. So that's always the way you look at it. Tenur Rabbanan, let's read another Braita which sort of talks about that. Ein shamin kav mipnei shemashbicho. You shouldn't evaluate in the size of a kav. Remember, sorry, just to give sizes again, right? A sa'ah is 6 kavim. So a sa'ah is, again, I don't exact, Charlie, maybe you'll find it for me. A sa'ah is a medium measurement. A kav is a very small measurement. We're going to talk about a beit kor. A beit kor is 30 sa'ah. So it's much, much, much bigger, okay? Says the Braita, you don't evaluate a kav, mipnei shemashbicho, because that will make it more valuable. We'll see why what that is in a second. The low beit kor, and you don't evaluate on the size of a beit kor, which is a humongous field, mipnei shepogmo, because that would make it less valuable. Now, what does that mean? Amar of Papa Achi Kamma, this is what that Braita means. Ein shamin kav b'shishim kabim. Don't look at this and say, look, the animal ate 2 rows of tomatoes. That's, a little bit of size in the field. Let's figure out how much it's worth. So let's start off by a kav, a field that's a size that's planted a kav, and say how much is that field worth, right? And then how much less would it be worth if you ate the tomatoes? And the reason you don't do that is because a kav is a very cheap field. Why is a kav a very cheap field? So Rashi explains here that a kav is not a very large field, and really people who want to buy a field usually buy a bigger field. And people who are very poor and can't buy anything, they buy a smaller field. So it's like a 2-bedroom apartment, right? There's very little market for the in-between size, and therefore it's cheap. And so if it's cheap, it means that the value of the field is going to be, say, $1,000, and my 10% is only going to be $100. So it's going to reduce the amount that I end up paying for my cow eating. But if you take a very big field, this is again Rashi's pshat, a huge field is incredibly expensive because it's very hard to get that much land together at once, right? If you're a developer or a farmer and you want to buy 50 acres or 100,000 acres, you pay more, this is how Rashi understands, per acre, because it's very valuable to get that kind of plot of land together, in which case you end up paying more and the owner, the damager, gets less value. So let me read that all inside. That provides benefit for the mazik, meaning he would end up paying less because a kav field is a cheaper field. It's not as desirable. But you also don't say a kor b'shishim kurim. You don't say, look, among 60 kurim, which are mega fields, pogam mazik, because that would cause more damage. It says matkefar Ravuna bar Manoach, then that doesn't say kor shishim kurim. It says lo beit kor, the lo kor mi baile. Alam Rafuna bar Manoach shmei Ravacha bar Ravika achi kitani. Same for what I just said. I actually said it backwards, but that's what I meant to say. Ein shamim kav b'fnei atzmo. You don't evaluate one kav on its own. Mipnei shemashbiach nizak. That a kav, like I just said, as I explained before, a kav is a cheaper amount, and therefore it's not valuable to get a kav, and therefore it would cheapen the one who was damaged because they would make less money for their damage. velo kav v'beit kor, but also don't look into a kav in the context of a huge field of a beit kor, mipnei shepogem nizak, because that would damage the nizak, because it would be less valuable. Ella b'shishim is talking about 1/60th, and that is the way we understand all the explanations according to Rashi, that you pay, basically, you look at how much this is worth within a field, but not any field, a field that's 60 sa'ah or 60 half sa'ah, 60 tarkav, or 60 alone, and that's how you evaluate the assessment of damage. And that's all Rashi's pshat. We have a few more minutes, so I'm going to tell you Tosfot really, really quickly. Tosfot does not like the fact that there's two assessments here, right? The first you assess how much I ate within a field of a sa'ah, and then the sa'ah within 60 sa'ah. As Tosfot understands that none of that really applies. And in fact, what the Mishnah was saying is that you always measure damage. This is my understanding of Tosfot, at least. You always measure damage in spaces of a sa'ah, or a tarkav, as our Mishnah said. Meaning, let's say you ate 5 sa'ahs. So Tosfot understands that a sa'ah is not a field the size of a sa'ah. It's the amount of weight that you ate of a sa'ah, which Charlie's showing us is 432 eggs, right? Which, I don't know what that is. Let's say 4 pounds, right? Or 15 pounds. So a cow can easily eat, 10 sa'ah, right? It can eat 100 pounds of food. That's what cows do. They eat all day, right? So therefore, what you basically do is you look for, instead of saying, did the cow eat 15 sa'ah or 10 sa'ah, you always basically look at how much is 1 sa'ah worth. And then you multiply that by 15. And so instead of looking at what it actually ate, you look at a standard value, which is 1 sa'ah within 60, right? So if you had a field with 60 sa'ah, and you could sell it for $1,000, and then you said, oh, my field only has 59 sa'ah. How much can I sell it for? That's the value of 1 sa'ah. And then you multiply it by whatever the cow ate. Anyways, let's read the final case in the Gemara.
Something interesting, though.
Yeah.
Rashi and Tosfot lived in a part of the world where you couldn't sell land.
Because they were Jewish, you're saying?
Well, Jews couldn't own land at all, but even the non-Jews, it was all tied up in the feudal system. So there was no such thing as a market for land in Europe when Rashi and Tosfot were around. So they're applying, they're trying to, they didn't have a lot of experience in this, and they're trying
to a case that you're going to see where they did buy it. Charlie's behind us. Connection. Can you guys hear me?
You broke up.
Can you guys hear me?
Can hear you now.
Yeah, no, I missed that. Am I now? Okay.
Yeah.
We have a few more lines. Tomorrow morning,
Okay.
much better connection. Okay,
Okay.
great. Let's start. We are 15 lines at the bottom. The first word on the line is ahu gab. Okay, ahu gabra. I'm sorry that I'm breaking up a little bit. Hopefully, you can hear this all. There was a man. You always love when a story starts. There was a man, right? And this man went to cut kaspa michavre. He cut down his friend's palm tree, right? I guess he had no good view from his window at a palm tree. He went one night and chopped it down. So the question is, how much do you have to pay? Up to the Kamei de Reish Galuta, they came in front of the Reish Galuta, which is the head of the court. Amar Le, and they said, and the Reish Galuta said, oh, that's a famous palm tree. Everyone knows about this palm tree. I once had a realtor. This is how I read it. Show me this palm tree. I was looking in the market for palm trees. And I once actually had a tour of this palm tree. There were 3 palm trees together. It was called the 3 palms. Okay. The Havishavim Meyazuzing. And they were selling it for 100 zuz, which is a lot of money. So, Zil, you cut down one of them, go and give the owner a third of that. Havle tlatin vitlata vitilta. Give him 33 1/3. Perfect. Right? That's the value of the palm trees. Cut it down, you got to pay it. Now, this goes against.
Breaking up. You just froze.
You're frozen if you hear me. Hello?
You froze.
Ellie, try turning off your video. Might improve your connection.
Okay. How's that?
Okay. The last I heard was this goes against.
Okay, so if you can hear me, I'll say it all again, and we're almost done. So this goes against our entire Mishnah, because our Mishnah said that if you cause damage, you pay within 1/60th or something like that. And here he cut down a palm tree, and the guy said, okay, 3 palm trees are $100. You got to pay $33, right? Direct value. So he got really angry, and he said, Gab Amr Gabi Reish Galuta Dedan Din da Parsa Lamli. Why am I going to Reish Galuta? It's not says. Of Nachman. I remember if Nachman had a very close relationship, he was married, I think, to the sister, or his sister was married to the Reish Galuta, and Rav Nachman said, right? Nachman said, he gave you the wrong psak. Pay 1/60th, meaning evaluate what a field would cost if it had 60 palm trees, which might be a certain value, and if you cut down one of the 60, which is going to be much less than buying an individual palm tree. Amalei Rava said, Rava, whoa, whoa, whoa. That's talking about, our Mishnah was talking about where an animal ate things. Here, it wasn't an animal. This guy cut down the palm tree. Imamru beniske mimono. We said that by money, right? If you're not miske mimono, your money, meaning your property, your animal damaged, you pay 1/60. But yomer beniske gufo, is that true by niske gufo? And I think we should actually stop here because this Braita goes till the 2 dots tomorrow. So we will pick it up here tomorrow, trying to understand whether there's a difference between where your animal damages, where we say you don't pay the direct damage, your animal eats a whole tomato plant, you don't pay, well, this is actually what I'm about to say to you is not necessarily true, but let's say it. Your animal eats a tomato plant, you don't pay 1 tomato plant, you pay a field that had 60 tomato plants or a field that had 59 tomato plants or something like that. The question is, if you yourself cut it down, do you pay differently? And we will pick it up from there tomorrow morning, God willing, at 7:45 a.m. and hopefully with a much better internet connection. Everyone will be refreshed and we will learn tomorrow. So Shavua Tov, everyone. Sorry about
You're
that.
like Rabbi Schwartz giving us a cliffhanger.
Cliffhanger. You got it. That's for tomorrow.
All
Okay.
right,
Ellie,
Yasha
you see,
Torah.
you take two measurements for Rashi. What do you do with those 2 measurements? The difference between them?
No, so according to Rashi, the Mishnah said, and this is how Rashi understands it, the Mishnah said you evaluate it within a Beit Sa'ah, within a field.
Mhm.
So meaning you don't look at, I ate a row of tomatoes, you see a row of tomatoes within a field. Let's say the field has 50 rows, you ate 1 row, it doesn't necessarily go down in value by 2%, right? It might go down in value by 1% because people are
Right.
buying the field mainly for the value of the field, not the value of the tomatoes. But what Rashi says is that you assess what percentage the value of the field would go down. But then the question is, how much is the field worth? And Rashi says you don't look at how much is a field of 1 sa'ah worth, because a sa'ah is a small field and it's worth a lot more than a regular field, because only poor people buy it. So you assess 1 sa'ah within 60 sa'ah. So basically you look at what does a 60 sa'ah field cost, you divide that by 60, and you get the value of 1 sa'ah. That's the first evaluation. And then within the 1 sa'ah, you say what percentage decline in value happened because of what my animal ate. And then you pay that amount.
I see. Okay.
That's Rashi.
Thank you. Thank
we will pick it up tomorrow morning, 7:45 a.m. Shavua Tov, everyone.
Sure, Joe.
Shabbat Tov.